Hey guys, Chris from Drift Outfitters here, and today we're going to tie my take on the classic salmon fly, the banana. This, although it's an Atlantic salmon pattern, originally is a tremendous steelhead fly in my opinion. It's just got a lot of nice colors kind of going for it, very sculpin, goby, general bait fish-like kind of fly. Yeah, really good around the Great Lakes, definitely work out east, out west, wherever you end up. So let's jump into it here. Pull this off, get a fresh tube on. These tubes that I'm tying on are the Pro Sportfisher Flexitubes in the 40-40 dimensions there. So that means that you've got 40 millimeters up front here of thinner tubing and 40 in the back of thicker stuff. This just avoids the need for any kind of two diameter system where you have to cut one end, thread it onto another. It's just a much more efficient kind of system overall in my books. So I'm actually not going to use this full front piece, and so I find it a little easier off the bat just to trim it down a little bit, about halfway. So I'll go ahead, just cut that. And then pop this onto our tube fly adapter here. Thick end first, push it up a decent ways there so it's not going to slip around on us. And for a thread today, I have, this is a 10-aught orange Veevus thread here. I'm going to start this just ahead of that thicker tubing on the thin stuff. Throw on a few wraps, then just carry it over the back here. Snip our tag end away. I'm just going to carry my thread down here. And if you haven't tied on a tube before, it's really no different than tying on a hook. It's just a different platform here, but all the steps are really the same. So I'm going to take it down a decent ways here, and this is kind of where you get to choose how large this fly is going to be. There's nothing that says you have to tie on this whole surface here. You can trim down the tube to whatever size you like, but the body size does sort of dictate the wing length and size here. So I'm going to take it back sort of just past the halfway mark on this thicker stuff. And my first material here is going to be a pearl tinsel. This is a large pearl tinsel from Veevus. I'm going to take a short length of that. And we'll just tie that in at the back here. Now, because this tinsel is translucent, it will pick up the color of whatever's underneath it. So if we wrap it over the orange thread, you will see the orange through. You can actually add an effect to your fly, if you want that sort of look by intentionally doing so. For me, I just want sort of a clear pearl tag here. So I'm going to start my first wrap fairly firmly, and take 1, 2, say 3 sort of overlapping wraps going back, and then I'm just going to reverse, pulling fairly tight because this is kind of slippery stuff. 2, 3 forward, and then tie off there. I'll let that thread sort of carry that tinsel around the other side. Find that helps make things a little more secure. Snip off the excess. And then we're ready for our tail. And the tail on this fly is going to be some Fluoro fiber in orange. In this case, you could use gold, would look good. You could skip the tail altogether. You could use another material if you wanted to. Fluoro fiber, though, is a really nice material for tails. Has a great glow in the water. You want to use this stuff fairly sparingly, so I'm going to take off, maybe 10 fibers, maybe a few more there. Short little, or not short, but thin little piece like that. Snip it off. I usually trim this stuff the full length so I don't have little half cut ends hanging off the back there. And what I do, I actually carry my thread forward here. And what I'll do is I'll kind of stagger the ends. So instead of having this square cut here, I'll just tease out a few ends. So I get a little bit of a staggered, if we pull this down, almost pointed kind of end. And I'm going to double this around my thread, keeping either end more or less aligned. I'm just kind of eyeball, if I start tying it in here, that's how long my tail is going to be. That's a little longer than I actually want it, so I'm going to carry forward a half wrap more, tie it in right at the front of that fat stuff. 2 wraps there, fold it back, and then pulling up on the material to keep it on top of the fly, going to spiral wraps rearwards, just kind of binding that down until I get back to the tinsel, and then I'm going to take a few more wraps forward quickly just to secure things a little more, like so. Now that might be a little bit longer than I want for the total tail, so I can trim this down slightly, but most of my tapering's already done by teasing those ends to begin with. So now I have a nice naturally tapered tail here. Now for the body, there's a couple components to it. First thing I'm going to tie in, this is a micro flat braid from Veevus in gold. So take a short length of that, call it 4 or 5 inches. The one thing you'll notice when tying on tubes, again, if you haven't before, is just that they do kind of eat up more material than you'd expect because you're tying on a larger diameter surface. Every wrap takes up a lot more material, so be generous if you're unsure how much material you need. Now that's actually going to be our rib is the gold. For the body, at least the rear half, we're going to use a copper and same medium flat braid, or micro flat braid rather. Take a similar length to that, and you can see I've brought my thread back up to the midpoint here. Going to catch that in right there. I'm just going to wrap this rearwards, sort of touching turns, and make one good clean wrap, making sure to cover up all of our thread wraps at the very back there. And then I'm going to reverse the direction I'm wrapping, come back forward, back to, again, around that midpoint here. I'm just going to cross that off. Like so. Before we touch that rib, I'm going to tie in the front half of this body. So we're going to have a body hackle on here. And that body hackle is going to be just sort of a light olive neck hackle here. Neck hackle is definitely preferable, I would say, to a saddle hackle. Just the fibers are a little shorter generally, at least if you're talking about streamer grade stuff. And they've got a nice taper to them too, so you can see how that's kind of a nice pointed feather. That's kind of a nice taper, starting small, ending large up here. Excuse me, and just sort of contributing to the overall taper of the fly. So I'm going to tie this in by the tip. So I'll hold that by the tip here. I just pull back the fibers to expose that tip. I'm going to tie it in on the side, like so. And then the front half of this body, you can use a few different things. Olive ice dub is a nice look. You could use gold too, would be a great look. Yellow would be good. Play around with them. And I actually like to be fairly generous when using this stuff because I'm going to brush out the body a little bit in this fly when I'm done. And I like to have this ice dub sort of, pull out and not, obviously not entirely, but just become a little buggier and give us some flash trailing through the fly. There's going to be flash in other components of the fly as well, but I just think it really adds to the flow. So be fairly generous, enough so that, if we brush it out and lose a few fibers, you still have some body here. The olive, what I like about the ice dub is that the olive isn't really a very deep olive. It's sort of a golden olive, more sort of yellowy, light olive. It's not super dark or drab. So I'm going to just sort of brush these fibers back slightly. I'm not really going for a real hard fold on this hackle. I want these fibers to stick up and give us some body. Take your time, make about 3 turns through this body or so. Like so. Again, you can see how quickly this tubing kind of eats up fibers, or length rather, of your materials that you're wrapping. Get that tied off. I'm just in front of that transition point now where the tubing goes from thick to thin. And then for our rib, as I mentioned, that's going to be our gold flat braid at the back here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm actually going to twist it. So now this is a round profile kind of material, and this is just a really nice strong ribbing material. You can use oval tinsel too, you can use wire, anything you like, but this does make for a very tough fly. So I'm going to counter wrap this now. So the opposite direction as my hackle and my thread wraps, bringing it through my body hackle. The reason for this counter wrap is just so that crisscrosses my hackle and reinforces everything as we go. So that gets brought up to the front. Tie that down good and tight. I find this is a fairly soft material, so there's no need to reverse your thread wraps. It ties in pretty well there. So that's our body. I'm going to take just a dubbing brush here. I'm going to brush that out a little bit. Get that flash picked out a little. Let's just sort of test the strength of your fly as well. So you know if you get a real mean fish on there, it's not going to tear up your work. Something like so. There we go. And then we're going to move on to the wing. So the wing's tied in a few sort of stages. The wing is mainly comprised of this stuff. This is silver fox. Silver fox over Arctic fox. It tends, for one, to be a much longer length fiber. So we've got some real length on this stuff. It also has, if you can see, some nice dark tips. So it gives us sort of a nice muted kind of look. But you could use other materials for this too. You could use fin raccoon if you want a softer material. You could use regular Arctic fox. I'm going to take a bundle like so. This is a relatively dense bundle. Snip it off. Again, full length. There's no need for half cut ends on your tails or materials. It just makes it harder to pick through them, get what you want next time. And I don't want to tie this in the full length. This fly ultimately will be yay long or so, but we want to build this up in stages, and we want some bulk to this wing. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pluck out some of the guard hairs here and the real short stuff. Leave us with this mid-length hair. And this is going to be my first wing. And my first wing should really extend, only maybe halfway down the tail, like so, okay? And what we're going to do, I'm going to measure that out. I'm going to trim these ends. I'm going to make sure my thread there's actually a little bit of a gap there between my hackle, the little bump there on the tube, and the thread. So I'm going to just take a tiny bit of dubbing and just cover that up. That'll all get covered up by hackles anyway, but makes me feel better. So I've got that snipped. I'm then going to turn it around so my tips are facing the front of the fly. Place it right on top. It's very important that you identify what will be the top of your fly here, and that's sort of dictated by the tail. The tail is going to be on top, so just reference that to keep everything in line. And you see I've just tied this in with the tips facing forward. Put 2 wraps on top of there, and then I'm reverse tying this. So I'm going to fold it back and put wraps, just a few of them, immediately in front of that hair. You can see this is standing right up. I have not wrapped over top of the hair. You don't want to do that. You want to wrap in front. The reason for this is this reverse tying, you can see how much more volume that gives us on the wing. This wing is going to get pressed down by our hackles and consecutive winging stages. So don't worry about its profile now, but we want to maintain that, that profile. Now I use a couple of different sort of collar hackles on this, but what I really like is this stuff, Ringneck Rump hackle. This adds a lot of flow to your flies. So this is just the loose stuff. You can use, if you have like a Ringneck Rump patch, all the better. I'm just going to grab a nice quality feather here. Like so. This is, what's the color name on this? I think this is just olive. This is golden yellow. Sorry. Olive would look very good on this too. So I've got the feather like so. I'm going to strip off this fluffy stuff on the bottom here. So I just have the finer fibers at the top. And then similarly to our body hackle, I'm just going to hold this by the tip and pull those fibers down and away from the stem so that I can clear open a tie-in point here. Two, three. I fold the tip back. So now I've tied it in, folded it back on itself and tied it in again. Makes it very unlikely it's going to pull out, and then I'm going to take that little tip section and snip it off. Now I've got this hackle. I'm going to just stroke these fibers back. And again, making wraps immediately in front of that first wing stage. Just really pack them on there, and you'll see as I get these wraps on, it will start to sort of hold back the wing for us in a more appropriate kind of angle. Like so. You can see that wing came down quite a bit doing that. So tie off that hackle in front, snip off the excess, like so. And then we're going to tie in our second stage of wing. So again, I'm going back to that silver fox. I'll take another decent sized clump. Like so. Just pull out the short stuff. So we've got these nice long fibers. I'm not going to pull out any of the guard hairs this time. I keep them full length. I'm going to sort of eyeball. There's a couple real long ones here. I'm going to just pull out quickly. But going to eyeball kind of the length of wing I want now. So like I said, I want this going back sort of full length of the tail or so. That's about the length. Again, I'm going to snip this off with a little extra, so I have space to reverse tie it again. Flip it around. Push that right up against the previous wing stage. Keep it on top. Like so. And then same thing, just fold that back. Bring my thread in front and make a few tight wraps there. There we go. Now you have an opportunity to mix in a little bit of flash to the wing if you want. So this is wing and flash. This is copper. And when taking this stuff out of the pack, I don't like to actually take the whole thing out of the pack. Just sort of expose the tips. Grab a loose clump here and draw a few out. Keeps everything a little neater. And I just lay that across the top. Catch it in front. And fold these ends back. I'm just looking to sort of keep that flash right on top of the fly here. It'll work its way in throughout the wing. And then flash, I don't want to cut square either. I am going to tie in one more stage of wing here. And I want this flash to sort of extend back, another centimeter or so back from the end of this fly. So I'll just come in and on angle, gently trim away that flash there. This is coming together nicely. Next hackle is going to be, same thing we worked with before. This is an orange rump hackle. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. Find a nice large hackle here. That one looks good. Pull off the fluff. And then pull down a few fibers from the tip. Tie that in on the side like so. And then again, fold this tip back and tie it down once more as well. And again, same thing. Just pull some of these fibers back and make a few good tight wraps right in front of that wing. Tie it off there, snip off butt. You can see it's coming together nicely. There's a couple broken fibers here, so I'm just going to trim them out of the way. And then we do have a third wing going on top. Now you could use a few different things for this. I actually am a big fan of craft fur. You don't see this used too much with a lot of steelhead and salmon flies, but it does work pretty well. But you could use Snow Runner for this if you had some exceptionally long fox. Anything like that will work well. This is a medium brown craft fur, and I'm going to take, again, a decent sized clump because we're just going to use the longest fibers from this one, and most of what you cut off here is going to be short stuff. So I've cut off a decent sized clump here. I'm going to hold it sort of 2/3 of the way up, and I'm going to pull out all the real short stuff. I'm not looking to build up bulk with this wing, I'm just looking to sort of complete the taper. So now you can see I've just got the longest stuff and laying that across the top. Yeah, that's looking good. You can tie this as long as short as you want. I go for, I guess if you're referring it back to something else, probably about, I want my wing to extend 1.5 times tail length there. So I'm just going to lay that right across the top, find where I like it, and then you'll notice I'm not actually reverse tying this final clump, I'm just tying it down straight. I've got all my bulk build up with those previous steps, so I don't need to worry about that. Once I have that tied in, come in, snip off those butts nice and tight. Like so. Now this is optional. I actually kind of like the way it looks. I like to take just an orange marker and try and only get it on the craft fur in the last stage. But I'll actually give this a little barring. I think that's kind of a cool look with the yellow and brown. I don't think it makes much difference fishing wise, but it just looks cool. If I ever marker anything up, I just like to give it a quick brush out because the ink can kind of stick the fibers together a little bit sometimes. It's just to free everything up and brush it out there with our comb. And then just to finish this guy off, what I like to do is take a little hen hackle. This is just sort of a light mottled hen here. I'm just going to choose a nice large feather from up top. Find one that we like here. This will work. This one you'll see the tip is a little beat up, but we've got nice long fibers off the side here. I'm going to strip off most of the fluff from the bottom, maybe leaving just a little bit. And I don't really care about these broken fibers because I'm not going to tie it in by the tip anyways. I'm going to start, in this case, we'll go down about as far as the last broken fibers go. But you'll see those are all shorter fibers anyways, so I'm not too concerned about that. Same way I tied in the ring neck. Right in front, fold the tip back. Snip off the excess. And tight wraps right in front. And by doing these intermittent hackles, there's a couple reasons for this. One, it allows you to build a cleaner head. If you try and pile all these winging stages right on top of each other, your head's going to end up being massive and completely out of control. So this keeps things a little more in check, but more importantly than that, the hackles in between each winging stage will actually help prop that wing up further. So you get even more volume out of it. That's what we're looking at now. Now you could stop here. I'm always a big fan of the effect that a little bit of jungle cock adds to a fly. So this is the Pro Sportfisher substitute stuff. This is an extra small size, assuming you're not lucky enough to have the real deal. I'm just gonna pop this open. If you haven't worked with this stuff before, I think this is actually a great material. I think it looks really good on flies, and it's a little underrated, especially in tubes. I think it looks right at home. This is on a backing, so all you do is you find a nail here, and you just pop it out from one side and pluck it off the other. Sometimes it'll come with a little extra bit of white paper stuff on the top. So I'll just trim that, clean it up a little bit with my scissors. That really doesn't matter a whole lot. So the way I like to tie these in, it's actually reverse. And if you tie them in at a slight angle, it will reverse that angle when you reverse it. So if I tie it down a little bit, it'll flow up and with the wing when I reverse it. but you can also just tie it in straight. It's a little more down off the side than I want. There we go. That's one. I'll do the same thing on the other side here. And I just want to make sure that I'm roughly mimicking the length and angle that I tied this in on, so when they are reversed, they do mirror each other. It flies nice and even. So that looks good to my eye. Now what I'm going to do here, because the head can get a little tricky to work with sometimes, is I take a little wax, just regular tying wax. This is not dubbing wax. This stuff has a lot more tack to it, a lot more grip. This is meant to keep your wraps from sliding and give you better purchase on your materials. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab one eye at a time. I'm going to push it back alongside the fly, pull back nice and tight, put a turn. I just put a single turn over there to hold it, and I'll do the same thing on the other side here. I'll just make a few wraps to cover up those waist ends here. There we go. Simple as that. And by folding it back, I just find it makes it a lot less likely it's ever going to slip out there. I do the same thing on natural jungle cock as well. With that, we can throw on a whip finish. And I'll show you how to finish this fly quickly as well. But that is it, essentially done. Now to finish this guy off, before I apply any cement or anything, I'm going to pop this off the adapter, so I'll just pull it straight off. I'm going to trim my tubing here, so it's just maybe a millimeter past, if that, past the end of the head. And when you do that, if you can see that, that sort of ovalizes the hole on the inside. Sometimes it closes up the tube a little bit, so I push it right back on the tube to open that hole up. And then, I'm just going to grab a lighter, or some kind of flame here. This one's dying on me a little bit. I'm just going to hold it up against that tube so it singes it back a little bit. When you do that, the plastic mushrooms back from the hole. And what it does is it creates a little ridge of plastic between your thread wraps and the end of the tube so that no thread wraps ever slide off. So we've got that in there, and that is your tube. I'm also going to trim the back here. So trimming the back, the cool thing about this junction tubing is that this thicker stuff also acts, the tubing in general, the thicker stuff acts as junction tubing. So when we're actually rigging this fly up, we don't need to add any other components. We just take a hook and tie it on our line, pull it up into the back end here. Now, this is maybe a little further back than I want my hook to sit. The fly might end up sitting back a little bit like that, which I don't want in the water. So I'm going to shorten up this tubing. And again, this is to your liking. Wherever you want the hook to sit, that's where you should cut it to. For me, it's probably about 2/3 the hook shank length back from our tag, back from that pearl tinsel that we tied in to start the fly. So I'm not cutting much tubing off, but that's about the length that I go for. And we can see, oops, see what this will look like here once it's rigged up. Once that's pulled in there. That's a nice distance back. I like how that's looking there. That is your banana tube. Awesome, awesome little fly there. Highly recommend you give it a go.